Welcome to the webinar, Using Psychology to Level Up B2B Sales Interviews. We're here with Anita Nielsen, and she's a sales performance coach, consultant, and best-selling author of Beat the Bots, How Your Humanity Can Future-Proof Your Tech Sales Career. And people know Anita and refer to her as the sales sensei, and using her 20 plus years of trench experience in technology sales and support, she teaches B2B sales professionals around the globe how to leverage key principles of human psychology to help buyers make their decision in the seller's favor. And sellers or sales leaders and professionals learn to level up their performance and also create customers for life using their humanity as a powerful differentiator. So thank you for coming, Anita. We're very excited to have you here. And we also have Debbie Mrazek, and she's the president of the sales company. She's a speaker, a trainer, coach, and author of 14 books, including the award-winning Field Guide to Sales, the All-Weather, All-Terrain Guide to Selling. So I'll send a link to that as well when I do my follow-up to this webinar. And she helps sellers, no matter their experience or level, accelerate their sales cycle where clients love to buy from them. So welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for coming on today. And I'm going to hand it over to Debbie. Her and Anita are going to have a conversation back and forth. I'll jump in if I have anything valuable to add, but I will mute myself and let the girls take it away. Thank you.
Krista, you are so wonderful. Thank you so much for those lovely introductions, and welcome to everybody, whether you're live or virtual. We are so delighted you're here today. We feel like this is one of the most critical discussions. It should always be a critical discussion, but in the world right now, the employment issues, what they are, this has become an even more critical discussion in the field of sales, being able to hire great salespeople. And it's not just about great salespeople, it's about the salespeople that are great for you. And I think what Anita is going to talk with us about today and understanding that psychology might help some of you understand even salespeople that you have today that maybe aren't performing quite the way you thought you would. Maybe there's some things that you could think different, maybe train them different, or maybe they just need to move on and you need to start again. But Anita, I am thrilled to do this with you. And, you know, I have every single week conversations I have, whether, you know, I'm gone to a meeting or I'm one-on-one with a client of mine, this issue of hiring great salespeople is top of mind again and again. And I think in this day and time where we're discovering this hybrid model of selling, you know, it's really brought into question who people are hiring. Again, even if they've had people great in the past, we have some new things to deal with today, what makes that difference. So welcome. I am delighted you could be with us today.
I'm so excited to speak with you, Debbie. You're a legend and I'm a huge fan. So thank you for having me.
Oh, me too. So share with us, let's just get right into it.
Yeah, sure.
So why is psychology, do you believe, is the missing link for a powerful sales interview? An interview that gets to the meat of it quickly, and we know we have the right person or not, so we can move on and we're not wasting time. What psychology is missing today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll just kind of do a little intro to what I talk about. So psychology, as far as, you know, what we look at it in sales, it's the study of human behavior, the thoughts and the emotions that drive that behavior, right? And as many of you know, sales is largely an emotional transaction, right? When you're a buyer, excuse me. And the challenge that we face in interviews today is that they often will ask questions that the salespeople already know. Right? There's people out, there's 8 million, oh, here's how to prepare for a sales interview things out there. And salespeople are clever and they will already have read them. They will already have had a rehearsed response for these questions. So when you go in and ask those, like, sell me this pen, there is no universe where that person hasn't at least thought about answering that question. So you're not getting to the real emotion or the thought process that's driving a behavior. I like to think that the elite salespeople in the world, they come to you with a really good balance of knowledge, of skill, and of will. Knowledge and skill are two things that I think that sales interviews, just standard sales interviews, do a pretty good job of assessing, right? Because you can ask really objective questions to understand someone's knowledge about something. Will, on the other hand, is a whole nother ballgame, right? That's to do with the emotions. That's to do with the motivation and how people engage and how they want to do something versus be made to do something. And I think it's important to use psychology in terms of the questions that you ask, because those types of questions let emotions seep into the conversation. Not to mention, people are usually not prepared for those types of questions. So that's why, I mean, it's a missing link, because you're getting to a level that you just can't get to with your high level knowledge and skill questions.
That is so wonderful. And I love your description of elite salespeople being knowledgeable, skillful, and, will. I mean, and you're right. They've heard the questions, they know the questions. And I oftentimes discern the difference myself, just in speaking briefly to people, between, thinking sales is cool, I make a lot of money, I want to do that, versus people who really know the profession of sales and excel at it, like you say. And the psychology of it, I think too, psychology is one of those words that many of us, we did not get a degree in that, and we don't think we're good at that. And yet I believe, just like we're doing today, we can talk about that. We can share things. We can share the kind of questions to ask, the things to look for, to help people recognize that psychology is a powerful thing, and we can do it in our own businesses.
Yes. So funny story. When I graduated with my degree, my undergraduate degree is in psychology, and then I've got a master's in business and leadership. And when I graduated, I remember for the first 6 or 7 months, I was looking for a job, and I got a corporate job. And I just kept on saying, I just want a refund for this psychology degree. It is doing nothing for me. It wasn't until years later that I just had this ton of bricks moment where it's like, oh my God, it's in everything. Everything that is happening is a function of psychology. As long as we're selling to humans, psychology is going to be a critical aspect of sales. And so it was amazing to me that I didn't even think through that. Psychology is just there. It's always there. It depends on us how much we want to delve into it and how much we want to use it as salespeople to differentiate, and as sales leaders to really dig in and figure out who's going to be the best fit for their team.
Absolutely. I told a story on myself recently. I too got a degree in business, not psychology, but in business. But I worked for Texas Instruments, where what was coveted there was engineering, that kind of thing. So I did get my degree in business. Then I went to HR and said, okay, now I guess it's time I sign up. And she said, no, somebody has to be able to talk to people.
That's right.
She didn't use the word psychology, but I realize now what she was saying to me was, yes, she was using the word talk, but I understood people. And I understood how to get past their fears and to understand what they were really saying, the underlying, and it was much later that I finally figured out, just like you. So we're so glad you got that degree.
I know, it's so nice that it finally means something. Yeah.
And I just learned about Anita this morning. She speaks more than one language. So not only can she do psychology, she can do it in different languages. So I'm so impressed. What were those languages again, Anita?
So I speak a couple of Indian dialects, Hindi and Punjabi, and then I've taken many years of Spanish. I'm still not fluent or that good at it, but I can order a margarita when I need to.
I was going to say, so let's all order a margarita and go with Anita for psychology class in Spanish.
Exactly.
Well, okay, so moving on, how can psychology really help sales leaders recognize best fit candidates? Because there may be a candidate in front of you that's excellent, but they're not the best fit for your needs, your company, your culture.
I love this question. So it boils down to what is actually going to make someone successful. And that's typically their environment. People have a certain set of thoughts and emotions, but the environment plays a big role in terms of how well those come to fruition and actually make them successful. And so for sales leaders, I think what's interesting is psychology in and of themselves is first and foremost, I think, the most important thing. If you're going in to interview sales candidates and you haven't done some really good sales, some self-reflection rather, about who you are as a sales leader, how you coach, how you lead, what your expectations are, then you're going to go in and you're going to find somebody who maybe seems good to you, and maybe on paper they look great, or maybe they have all the things that you suspect would be great in sales. But if you haven't taken that time to think, okay, well, I'm a coach who likes to do X, Y, Z. Is this someone who's going to be okay with that? My team is a team of pretty much mediocre players, but we've got a couple of good ones. Is this person going to be elevating this team, or are they going to bring the team down? That's the kind of things that as sales leaders, we have to think about when we're hiring. And so I look at an interview as kind of a two-step process, right? There's the process of the interview of the candidate, and then there's the self-reflection after the interview of the sales leader to have to figure out, okay, this person said this, how's that going to work? And, it seems intuitive, but it's really not. I mean, I've sat with so many sales leaders and they don't make that time at the end of it. We always debrief on interviews, right? But that self-focus and that self-questioning, that is what is critical, because ultimately people will succeed or fail based on how well they interact with leadership and culture.
And Anita, that brings up a good point for those of us who are very small companies. You're like me, we deal with small family-owned companies as well as the Fortune 50. But, if you are one of those smaller companies and you don't have somebody else in your organization that you can do that self-reflection, after the interview's over, I mean, for heaven's sakes, reach out to Anita. An objective third party can be priceless for you. One of the other things I was thinking of in this best fit is thinking about if you have multiple salespeople, the ones you have already. I'm a huge proponent that we do not want all our salespeople to be alike. In fact, I'm pretty sure Anita and Kristen know this about me. If somebody calls and says, oh my gosh, I have the superstar salesperson, Mary, and I want everybody to be just like her, I use that as a filter that they will not be my client. Right. I believe every individual sells different, and that's fine. Is their difference, though, fine for you? So in that reflection and looking at what you have already and the skills and the talent and how it's working for current clients, what else maybe do you need to get additional clients with a different skill set, a different way of being, a different way of selling that could enhance your organization?
Right. That's what we have to be thinking about. And, I look at how salespeople come into interviews. They know the presentation that they have to give, and they know because most sales leaders are looking for that elite, that awesome, that wonderful salesperson. But there's really not such a thing, because if you have an elite salesperson at one company, that same salesperson, and this has happened to too many people to count, they'll go to another company and they fail. Is it that salesperson that failed? Is it the system? We'll never really know, right? Because no one's doing that analysis. But as a sales leader, you need to think, okay, this person is similar to the people I already have, or they're different. I'm a strong believer of the fact that the only thing that's left to differentiate our B2B salespeople is who they are and what they stand for, how they take that and make it meaningful for their buyer. And if you have all samesies salespeople, you're having a lot of the same conversations that probably other organizations are having. But if you have people that are genuinely curious, that's one thing that you always want to look for. People that want to know people that have a breadth of experience. I mean, I talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And if you've got a team that looks one way, but you're trying to sell to customers that are not that same look, you're going to struggle, because inevitably you don't have the experience to understand what that person's journey is like. And let's face it, buying is not just about buying a product. Buying is one human being making a purchasing decision that is going to impact who they are as a person, who they are as playing a role in a company, and their livelihood. At some point, that's what it ends up boiling down to. So you have to have that breadth of experience, and you don't want everyone to be the same. Where's the learning in that? You can't learn, and that's the most important thing. Another thing that you look for, is this somebody that's willing to learn and grow?
Yes, exactly. A couple of things in there, Anita, like we were talking about people having more difficulty finding salespeople today. And so being more thorough with how they're looking for them and preparing better and all. But I have talked about for years, and I bet you have too, where so oftentimes in the past, the sales team was, especially for me working in seismic industry, oil industry, was men.
Yeah.
And so this question of diversity, inclusivity, those kinds of things, I have said to people for years, have you thought about having a woman of color, a person of color? This can be critical because there's psychology to do with that too. Not all men want to deal with just men. There are men that for whatever reason, they relate better to a woman, they don't mind. She's better at listening, really caring about what you have to say. Those are stereotypes and I apologize. But, it's just those kind of things that for so long, people just like, I need a salesman. You said you're a salesman. Great, check. I'm hiring you. And another major thing you talked about that I know I didn't understand early in my career was I was always as a child extremely curious. And not consciously, perhaps, I didn't understand why other people weren't. How does this work? I loved going on those tours of how do you make bread? And then when I got into technology, to be in factories every single day building, whether it's going to the moon or it's going to make your telephone work, was just incredible. And that curious and asking questions so that other people talk to you can be so powerful. So I love this, who they are, where they started, is this a good fit? I think these are just powerful things for people to consider.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to one thing we talked about earlier, because I think it's an important point, but this idea that you're self-reflecting as a leader, part of that is understanding, and I'm saying this again for emphasis, your skills as a coach, right? Your will, your skill, and your knowledge of coaching. I mean, there's 1.5 million statistics out there about how coaching is the differentiator between a regular team and an elite team. And if you as a sales leader, first of all, I would hope that you're working on your coaching skills anyway, right? As part of your development.
Yes.
But if you're not, be very real with yourself when you go into that interview. And one of the questions I like to ask is, how frequently, you're talking to a candidate, how frequently do you like to get coaching? It's a beautiful question, because in that moment, that candidate has to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to try to please you by saying they don't need a lot of coaching because they don't want to be the person that's a burden on their leader, right? Or they're going to say, I'm somebody who needs coaching regularly because I want to grow. You always, always, always want the person that's going to say, I like frequent feedback and coaching because that helps me grow. But as a sales leader, if you really aren't the coachy person, you're probably going to go for the person that says, okay, I know I'm good. I can do everything. I can do everything myself. I've got this. I don't need coaching. Sometimes those people, we call them the lone wolves, they are elite performers, but the damage that they do to your team as a whole can be horrible. So make sure that you're trying to match honestly how you coach with what that person expects. It's a game changer. You want the person that says they want coaching and that they've been successful with coaching. The best case is if they come back and give you an example of how they weren't good at something and they were coached through it. And that's kind of a follow-on question that you ask. But be real with yourself. That's the only way you're going to be real about the decision that you make.
Anita, that question is brilliant. I mean, I just need to take a moment here. It is so brilliant. And you were right. Most managers are like, well, thank God they don't need anything. And I've been on those teams with a lone wolf, and it's like, and it hampers the success of the whole team because everybody's like, well, I can't be like him and I don't want to ask, and I would be so embarrassed. I need help, and all. And yet what I wish the culture, exactly what you said, where we made it okay. We said out loud, it is okay to need coaching. People, look at you, look at me, look at Kristen, think, oh, they've got it all together. Let me tell you, I'm a one-person business. I have a business coach, Steve Strauss, been with me for 20 years. And, it's not in every week, every day, but it's like something comes up and it's, boy, howdy, I need to talk to somebody about this. I really don't know. And I feel no shame any longer, saying, I would like to know how to do this better, or I would like to, and, maybe it's not him, maybe he refers me to somebody else. But if your team knows that you're open to them learning and how they learn, and you care about it to help them be the best they can be, I mean, what a magnificent team member that person's going to be. And I also think you made a point about the leader. The leader needs to understand for themselves. This does not make them not be able to be a leader if they're not good at coaching, but to recognize that they're not.
Right.
And then who is going to be that person?
That's right.
You know, I believe I'm like you in that, you know, we have people who have teams, have leaders, whatever, and we're like the objective third party coach,
Right.
you know, like we're on retainer to answer those questions for them. And that's powerful to understand as a leader what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and how you best empower your team to be the best that they are.
Yeah, I mean, it boils down to leadership, right? One of the most important leadership skills is lifelong learning. It is self-reflection. So as a sales leader, you have to be good at those to some degree, or at least at a minimum, understand how important they are. One of the things I like to say is you can't read the label of the jar you're in. People have heard me say that, right? One of my favorite things in the whole world, because I'm in it. I'm sitting in it. I cannot see clearly the emotions, my own psychology. There's no universe where I can see objectively a situation that I am in. It's just not possible.
Right.
So bringing in somebody from the outside to help you, even if they're not going to be your coach, just to help you see that. I mean, I started sitting in on interviews years ago. It wasn't something that I planned on doing as part of my career, but it just made sense, right? And then I went back and learned about it and got some training on it. But it's important to have someone else with a different viewpoint sitting in there listening. And as a sales leader, you don't want people from your own organization, because they all have their own kind of agenda, right? They're all kind of looking out a little bit for themselves, and you don't know who is or who isn't. And so as a sales leader, it's a huge responsibility to make the right decision. Absolutely bring other people in, but make sure you've got somebody in there that's objective and that you can trust to have your back to make the right decision, and who's going to push on you.
Absolutely. And so important to invest in these conversations like we're talking about, Anita, before you hire them.
Yes.
You know, if somebody said to me, I haven't read a book since college, I'm going to be hard pressed. You know, it's like, that's a little thing, and they may just not read. Maybe they listen to books on tape or something. But, I'm looking like you, for those that are willing to learn, care to learn, because just like the world has been upside down the last 2 years where we couldn't sell in person, we had to sell virtually. We've never done that. They were never an inside salesperson, perhaps. And so you have to adjust. Were you willing to learn to do that? Or have you just been kicking and screaming and fighting and saying bad words for 2 years?
Right.
And what's it going to be going forward?
Exactly. I mean, it's just the decision itself is so high pressure. And, one of the things I joke about is there's companies where people will have several sales leaders, and you always know that one of them is like the dude that can't hire, right? Or the gal who can't hire to save her life. And that's a really sad thing to be, because right now, especially if you're in a company in growth, you can't be that person without really damaging your own credibility. And it really doesn't speak well to your leadership skills if you're not asking those types of questions. And so self-reflection is interesting because it's absolutely something that we need in sales leaders. Everybody could use a little bit of it, right? Including my beloved salespeople. One of the questions that I love to tell sales leaders to ask is, if I called a client of yours right now, what would be the 3 words that they would say to describe you? Now, this is awesome, because there's going to be in the gut of that salesperson what they want to say, because they rehearsed and they learned and they tried to figure out the right answer for that. But you want that to be a really true answer. And the way to do that is when you go back and do your customer references, which God help me if you're not, you ask that same question to that customer reference and see what the words are that they use. Then you can kind of do a comparison, and that tells you what the self-reflection looks like for that individual, that seller that you were interviewing. Like, did they just make stuff up because they thought it was the right answer? Or is it truly what that customer felt?
Absolutely. And I think we would be remiss in this too, just quickly, if you don't do those things, it is costing you money.
That's right.
You've now wasted time interviewing something. You wasted their time and your time. That's money. Or you've not asked those things, you hired them, and now it's really going to cost you money if you didn't. So we're salespeople. So we have to have that money talk too.
Money, reputation. Yeah, money, reputation, credibility. Yeah. I mean, as a leader, that's something it's crucial to your career. There's that joke about how, sales leader lifespan, or maybe it's actually a statistic, is like 18 months or something. there's a reason for that. It's really hard to be a very good sales leader and to do it for a really long period of time. It's not an easy job. And that's another thing, we talk about self-reflection. Another question that I love to ask or to coach sales leaders to ask is, tell me about the most difficult feedback you ever got and why. Now, here's the thing. Somebody who has rehearsed and who's trying to put on a good show would say something like, gosh, I've never really gotten maybe that much. I mean, I hope if they do this, then just don't hire them on principle, but they may say something doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Everybody remembers the worst piece of feedback they got, period.
Yes.
Full stop. You don't forget it.
And who said it and when.
Exactly. And how you felt in that moment. And so you want someone who's going to level with you and tell you the truth, because that's going to tell you a couple things. One, they're strong enough in themselves to be able to admit it. They probably have a story about how they overcame whatever that negative aspect was that they got the feedback on. And they're willing to learn and they're willing to grow. Back to that same thing. That's the will piece of it, the learning, the growing, the curiosity. These types of questions, they give you one major answer, but it's the subtext that's the psychology of it. You want to ask them, how did you react when you got that feedback? I mean, if someone says that they nodded and smiled and said, you're right, that's a lie. That's a lie. People don't do that. They might say something like, wow, I didn't see that, or thank you for pointing that out. That's important to know,
right?
How they reacted to it, right? And that's the emotion piece of the psychology. So psychology is already everywhere, but you have to use it as your weapon as a sales leader when it comes to being able to find that top talent before somebody else does.
Absolutely. So how do we analyze candidates' responses post-sales interview to really identify the sales hire? Because, for example, if you're on a team of other people, you're going to, you did the interview, you're leaving, and now you need to communicate it to other people. Your why not. Those, do you have a process or something to analyze post-interview?
Yeah, there's, depending on what type of a company you are, I mean, some people have a full-on rubric, right, that has, criteria and the score for each one. I mean, I've seen that happen. Some people are just like, well, I trust my gut and I'm going to go talk to my other sales leaders and see. Somewhere in between that is the right way to do it. And back to the idea of self-reflection, a lot of it is that. But I mean, you have to ask yourself, is this somebody that'll fit on my team? Is this somebody that will fit with my coaching skills? Is this somebody that I'm happy to put in front of a customer? One of the questions I like to ask, even just ask myself afterward, is this somebody that I would take to dinner with my family? Would I introduce them to my family tomorrow? Everyone, when you ask that question, your gut said something. Now, you can be the brilliant sales leader who realizes when your gut said, probably not, and moves on to the next candidate. Or you can be someone, yeah, probably. And again, that's your own self, that's your resolve and how you reflect on what you think is important. If you can't trust, very important word, or if you don't feel comfortable with somebody bringing them in to have dinner with your family, how's that going to work for you sending them into a customer who's even making a decision, multi-million-dollar decision? That's not the person that you want in there. So questions like that, you ask yourself, what do I think the 3 words are that describe this candidate? Right. And that's just a whole game. So post-interview, you're going to ask their customer. We do employee reference checks, which is foolishness. I mean, employers aren't legally allowed to say legally say anything really bad. So why don't we go to customers? Not because we're looking for something bad, but because we want to hear what their experiences was. Because at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? The experience of that customer. So what did I, as a sales leader, call out as the 3 words? What did that customer say versus what that candidate said? Really important. Other things, did they send a thank you email or a note? That's a fundamental one.
Yes.
But there's psychology behind that, right? Because if you've got what people sometimes look at as a lone wolf or the very self-oriented individual, they might not, because they just feel like they deserve that job, right? They may not take that, but that's not who you want with your customer. You don't want someone who feels like they deserve the ability to not say thank you and to follow up with.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm not even going to say that that's always the case, but I'm not risking it. I mean, if there's even a fraction of a chance that behavior means that behavior for my customer, no, thank you. The problem is we're desperate right now. Sales leaders are in a moment of desperation. Desperation makes for crappy decisions. And so that's why it's even more important than ever to ask yourself, and it's okay to hold on, and it hurts to have a backfill role that's not there. It hurts to have that missing person, but it hurts more to hire someone who's going to totally hurt your culture, hurt your bottom line, and drive you bananas in the process. You have to choose, and you have to look longer term for these types of things. Gosh, what else?
And think about, like that desperate, people say, Deb, just get me a warm body. It's like, no.
That's right. No, that's not what you want, for the love of God.
Yes.
Right? Or what do they bring to my team? What specifically did I see in this individual that I can bring back and know that fits a missing on my team? Another question that I love to say is, that I love to ask candidates is, tell me a story about somebody on your team saving the day for you and helping you. It is mind-boggling to me how many salespeople struggle with that answer. They're lone wolves. They don't want to either acknowledge somebody else who did something for them, or they don't remember, it wasn't important enough to them. You don't want that person. And that's part of your self-reflection as a leader afterward. Think very carefully how they answer that question, because you're working as a leader for a team, not for a group of lone wolves. It's a pack. And so they have to understand how to do that, right?
And if they can't recognize those that work with them, because, even if you are a lone wolf, there's still no way you're doing it by yourself.
Exactly.
There's no way. You spoke about the trust, the intuition. I don't know about you, it took me a long time to really figure out how powerful my intuition was. Yeah. I mean, really. And, this may sound old fashioned to some, but I am telling you, to this day, when you have a candidate that you believe is the right candidate, and this could be for inside sales, but specifically for outside sales, I still think one of the most powerful, I'm saying we're along, we're in agreement with other people. We think this is going to be our candidate, but to invite them to dinner and include somebody else other than yourself. Sometimes I've even brought a spouse, or somebody else, because what I'm looking for, and I always get there early, I want to see how they treat the valet, because we're going somewhere nice.
Yes.
I want to see how they treat the valet. I want to see how they treat the hostess. I want to see how they act when they sit down, when they're presented with a menu, when they're asked about a drink, how they do conversation. Do they initiate it, or are they a bump on a log, and then when the bill comes, how is that then reversed? When you leave, did you thank the wonderful waiter, the staff, did the hostess? How did you treat the valet? Did you tip generously? Were you cheap? All those things, because those things are all going to happen when you are not in the room. And if they will do that with you in the room.
Yes, imagine, but you're not looking.
Yes. What will they do? And it's those little things that people, they see them, whether you like it or not, they see them. So I still think that's a powerful tool.
Right?
Yes.
I think that's the thing, they feel them. So if you're talking to somebody on the wait staff, for example, and you're treating them poorly, they feel something there. And if you're somebody who did that and didn't understand that there's a feeling that happens, we talk about empathy. That's table stakes at this point. There is no, you should have empathy as a salesperson. You better have empathy as a salesperson.
Absolutely.
It's not optional. The other one that's kind of like that, made me think of it, Debbie, was I used to work at a company, and it was like a hall, a lot of open cubes, and people were always kind of walking around talking. And so I had the sales leader, I had him bring the candidate the long way to the conference room, where they had to pass dozens of people to get there. And I would have them watch. Does that person look up, look straight ahead, look at people, or say hi or smile, or what? I mean, the silliest little thing that you might not think of, but boy, is that telling. Talk about behaviors and the emotions and the thought process behind it. You want someone who's warm and who isn't so tied up that they're, it amazes me that those things get lost in the shuffle.
It's like good manners. We laugh at ourselves and we think of our moms, and good manners are always important. But the truth is, manners are important. You can be absolutely brilliant, know everything about the product, the service, and all of that. But the things that are going to trip you up are human things.
That's exactly right. It's the human things that'll ultimately make you win. Yes. And it's the human things that'll ultimately make you lose. And it all depends on the psychology, how well you recognize which is which. And I think that's where sales leaders are, it's easy to forget right now when you're in the moment and you desperately need somebody. But that's what's important. And salespeople, like I said, they rehearsed. I cannot say that enough. There's no dummies that are interviewing for top sales position. Okay, maybe there's a couple, but in general, if they made it to
In
you
every
after
crowd.
recruiters and stuff,
Yeah.
they've made it to you through the recruiters and stuff, they're not the worst of the bunch, right? They're probably somebody who has some qualification, and they're not going to say things to you like that, right? They're going to say what they think is the right answer. If someone says that they're one of the areas that they need help with is empathy, okay, nice to meet you. Have a nice career, because it will not be here. Right. You can't, first of all, the fact that somebody said that, they lived under a rock for the past 5 years, because that's arguably the most important thing that you have to have as a salesperson.
Absolutely.
But you want to ask them, what would make an ideal sales leader for you?
And, one of the things you and I didn't talk about, but just comes to mind, when companies are using a recruiter,
yes,
they need to know that, I believe that they're hiring them.
That's
I'm
right.
hiring you, the recruiter. So I do get to tell you everything I want. I see so many people give their power over to the recruiter, just saying, hi, I need an outside salesman that can do this, or salesperson that can do this area of Georgia. And, whoever you got. No, you are paying good money for that recruiter to do this work that we're talking about. So by the time they get to me, they're not a sure thing, but they ought to be 80% by then.
Oh, I love this so much, because it makes me think of, so if you're a sales leader that does that, that tells me that you're not doing a good job of setting expectations, right? There's a whole slew of psychological things behind that, but bottom line is you're not setting good expectations. Well, guess what? That's another thing that you better be able to recognize in your people. And another question that you would ask is, tell me a time when you had to set the expectation with a client and it was difficult because their expectations were different, right? Or reset an expectation. People don't really know how to answer that unless they've truly done it, and if they've done it well. If you as a sales leader aren't able to do it, it's going to be really difficult for you to see if somebody else does. That's another reason why you get somebody else in who knows how to read those types of things. That's super important.
So I hate it. Look how quickly time's gone already. So tell us other ways that psychology can help sellers be more effective in their sales process.
Yeah, that's my jam, right? So salespeople that can leverage even basic principles of psychology, some of what we've been talking about here, they will do better. I think the first thing to understand is that there's a trust component. We've all talked about trust, but what is that? Trust looks different to different people. And so to me, one of the most important things that you have to do is ask the questions so that the psychology will reveal itself, similar to these interviews. If you ask the right, big, fat, open questions that let the emotion seep in, or let a little bit of the thought process seep in, that's how you will be able to predict that buyer's behavior. Because that's the other part of psychology, right? You learn and you study the emotions, the will, all of those things, the thought process. But at the end of the day, you're doing that probably so you can help predict behavior. Right? That's a study that's happening for some reason, something that you're going to use it for beyond that moment. And that's something that people have to be able to recognize. I'm understanding this customer's behavior so that I can anticipate what their behavior is. And that's a skill. You may know psychology, but actually doing that is a little bit difficult. Right. You have to be mindful and deliberate about it. The other thing about psychology is, it goes back to questions, right? Instead of asking, a regular open-ended question like, tell me what your org structure is, you ask something like, help me understand what your team looks like, right? And inevitably, they're going to tell you more information with that second question. Even though they're both open-ended questions, the second one lets emotion seep in. If you're talking to somebody who's a leader that's making a decision, you'll get a pretty good feel about which team members they feel good about, which ones they don't, even if it's in body language. And as you learn that and as you listen, you're building trust. So to me, the psychology can't come into play if salespeople aren't doing two things. One, research in advance to create really good questions, ask the good questions. And then three, listen like your job depends on it, because it kind of does. Yes. Right. And it's easy to say active listening, but it's a miracle to see how many people actually can do it. There's just, I have a little game that I play in all of my classes. And every time people give themselves a score, a really high score on a pre-work that I give them on how good of a listener they are. Well, we get to the class and I blindside them because it's fun. That's what I do. And ultimately I catch them not listening. And then they just look at you like, Oh my God, she busted me. Yeah, I did, because you really aren't listening and your company is paying you to listen to me and you can't listen. I'm not feeling good about what you're doing in front of a customer, right? So
Absolutely.
those, once you do, if you're doing those things right, the information you get is full of psychology.
Yes.
And that's probably the most important way to look at it.
I think one of the things people, whether they can articulate it this clearly or not, is that salespeople that come to them that are not prepared.
Yeah.
And most of us do not have a product or service that's just sold in one call or one visit or those kind of things. And so one of the things I've advocated for always, I found it works in my career and other salespeople I worked with, is preparing the questions in advance. Like, what do you ask on the first visit, on the second visit, on the third visit? And we would role play these at the office before we were going tomorrow, for our first visit or our second visit or third visit. And then, I'll never forget when somebody said, well, Deb, the questions are really important, but you must listen for the answers.
That's right.
Well, I've always been a note taker, it's like a processing, whether I go back and read them, and all. And oftentimes I found really that being prepared with the question, I knew what I wanted the answer to be,
Right.
but to ask the question to elicit whatever answer they gave me and really listen for it to know, well, that is what they're saying, or it's not exactly, next question. And I just think that being prepared, whether you're selling your company to this person, you want to hire them, or to the recruiter, to the customer, it's critical.
Yeah.
Critical. And the listening,
It's so important. I
Yeah.
mean, the listening thing that I always talk about is, most people, when they're listening to figure out what they're going to say next, as opposed to what the customer is actually saying, the buyer's actually saying, or even the candidate's actually saying in the interview scenario. Listening it's important because first of all, people love to talk about themselves. I think everybody can agree on that, right? I'd rather talk about myself than something I don't know about. However, what people love more than that is that feeling of being heard. Right? I mean, think to yourselves, everyone who's listening, think to yourselves, when was the last time you sat with someone and felt completely heard? Not that they were looking at their phone, not that they were looking off into space or looking at a menu, really, truly heard. And it's a little bit scary what that answer often ends up being. And so imagine how wonderful. So I always say, I've got 2 teenagers at home. If someone truly listens to me, it's like crack. It's a high, because no one listens to me around here. But my husband and 2 teenagers, I'm not getting my say around here and I'm not being heard. When somebody does do that, it just feels amazing. And then I tend to trust that person because they showed me the ultimate respect by truly listening. And, that trust has to happen. It has to happen early on. And, empathy, curiosity, those are the types of things that bring that out.
Absolutely. And the other thing I do think it takes time to learn in listening is being okay with silence. Not everybody can formulate their thoughts or their responses perhaps as quickly as you, and that is not a bad thing. They just need an extra moment, and it's really okay, because you do want to know what they're thinking.
Yes. And think about how it feels to them if you're trying to constantly fill their silence. It almost feels like this person can't even give me a second to think. And that doesn't feel good, right? But when you're respectful and you give them a moment to think, they feel safer because they feel like they were able to take that moment without judgment, without being, looking like somebody who doesn't know what they want to say. People do that. And it's really important. It's actually a really good skill set to have, to be able to pause before you speak.
Yes, there's power.
Well, I'm still working on that one, but there is a lot of power in that, right? Just that moment.
Definitely is. So Anita, what have we not touched on? What is something, like when we think of, like I said, we think about psychology being doctors in white jackets, perhaps, but it really is each and every one of us. And like you were talking about, even with our children, our loved ones, the dog,
Right.
we probably do it and we don't even recognize it as that. Is there something else from a sales perspective and getting these really great candidates to come to us, that we should be communicating or understanding better?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's important, going back to what you were saying about preparation, as a sales leader, one of the things you want to ask is, what can I tell you about our company, right? Our company culture, product, you can even call out a few things. It's interesting to see where they go, right? Because first of all, somebody who's done their research will have good questions about product. That's your knowledge, right? They will talk about, certain behaviors. Maybe they'll talk about, hey, what is it like for employees here, the engagement, et cetera. They will ask what the culture is like. You want the person that's going to ask what the culture is like. Unfortunately, you may not have the great answer, but you'll work on it. That's who you want, because that person cares enough to know that they have to fit where they go. And they're not just trying to get a job. They're trying to find a place where they can grow and be successful,
Yes.
right? Product knowledge is something that you can transfer. Knowledge is not that difficult. It's that will, that desire to fit in a group and to thrive there. That's what you're looking for. And so find the will, I think, is probably the best advice I can give. And your questions are what gets you to that point. So asking the simple questions that, you read in every single question out there is not going to get you there, right? But asking questions like, what's the expectation around coaching? It's important, and it's a reflection of you. So have your team in mind, have your own behaviors or needs, the way that you act, have that in mind, and understand the culture. If you want people to fit with you, your team, and your culture, you have to first really understand you, your team, and your culture. And that's psychology too. I mean, psychology is as simple as, being able to ask the right question and listen to the answer. I mean, that is because that's a behavior that makes a difference. It's a behavior that evokes emotion. And that's what it boils down to. It is everywhere. Psychology is everywhere. It's just a matter of take a big step back and look and see what's at play. What's motivating that person to make the decision?
Absolutely. So one last thing, in this world that we live in today, and you hear us say, we hear other people say, there aren't enough good candidates out there. So thinking about somebody that maybe has expertise in the business world, whether a little or a lot, been doing other things. I have known people who did transition beautifully from something else into sales. Would the psychology be any different in trying to attract someone to help them understand skills that they have and how they could transfer and they could be successful, not just transferring like you'd be okay, but transfer and really be successful in a whole different way?
100%. So this is one of my favorite things that I'm seeing a lot of, especially since the pandemic. Teachers, some of the top salespeople that I see right now that were hired kind of during the pandemic, they soared. Teachers. Why? Because if you have the patience to deal with a student, you have the patience to listen and wait for a customer to give you the answer. You know how to ask questions. You genuinely want to help someone. So there's a little bit of a difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is when you really take the time to listen and understand what somebody feels, and you can kind of like be in their shoes, right? The compassion is the next layer, and that is see where they're at and want to help them, want to be of service to them. Teachers, that's their DNA. I mean, if you're a good teacher, that's where you come from. So that's really important. Coaches, therapists. I mean, I've seen counselors that have gone in and have just been amazing at sales. They make a ton more money than they did before. Mm-hmm. So those types of professions where you have to be with the public, you have to be with people and really know how to understand people and work to grow people, that's amazing, right? And yeah, Andre says social workers, 100%.
Yes, I have a friend, Candace Fitzpatrick, has a company called Core Clarity, and they focus on the tool Strength Finders. There's many assessment tools and tools out there, but one of the things during these difficult times was they had all their employees do a Strength Finder assessment, made an inventory of the strengths they had in the company, because they did not want to let someone go. They didn't want to let anyone go. But some people were willing to take strengths they had here and repurpose them over here. And I have not forgotten that. And that's where I came, that question, when it's somebody who hasn't necessarily done sales before, but might be excellent at it. They might need additional coaching and all that's okay. But are they willing to learn, that type of thing that, sometimes we have great resources with what we already have, and we're not really looking at them.
Yes, it's the knowledge, skill, and will again, right?
Yes.
With teachers, we have to teach the knowledge. We probably have to teach a little bit of the skill, but the will, they already have it because they have been serving students for so long, right? I mean, teachers, they sell themselves. I mean, you know the difference between a good teacher and a bad teacher,
Absolutely.
and who put their heart into it and who didn't. And customers know the difference between a salesperson who's selling them and someone who put their heart into it. And so when you can find people with the will, everything else you can train. Right. That will.
That is so true.
You can't
so
teach
true.
that.
I'm going to jump in, ladies. Yes.
Krista, I see on here you had a teaching certificate for high school biology.
Yes, I did.
Oh my gosh, you get a front row seat in heaven if you can deal with high school kids.
Well, I never went into it. I went straight from my certificate.
Yeah.
I did my
maybe some wisdom.
And I went into sales.
You are wise. You're a wise woman. I could not do it.
Oh my gosh.
I couldn't deal with the kids that well. I was too young at that point. But my question is a little bit technical. I'm actually in the process of hiring a marketing strategist, so not a salesperson, but I think all the questions you ask are just super valuable. And what I was wondering about, like, I don't know how to interview, like rehearsing. What do you think about like rehearsing? How long should you spend preparing? How long does it typically take to hire someone? Like, how long should I spend, like 5 hours per person, or like, I don't know. I just was curious about your thoughts around that.
It's a great question. And since you have to be deliberate, like we've talked about, right? If you've got a good series of questions that are pretty applicable, like the ones I've talked about, that's instant preparation. Now, you can't ask all questions like that because they'll be thinking that they're on a shrink seat, which is not always a bad thing, but it could get ugly. And so what you want to have is your handful of questions that you know are going to get you to that will or what you need to know. Preparation wise, you want to read their resume. You need to look at their LinkedIn profile, check and see what activity they've had on LinkedIn. I mean, that's a really good way to see how they're interacting with other human beings. Are they engaging? Also very important. And they're a marketing person, so they need to be all over social, right? So I think preparation wise, I mean, I don't think you need 5 hours. I don't even think you need sometimes an hour. I think you need to be able to go in there knowing what you want and having the questions in hand to be able to get to it. And then the rest of it, I mean, if you've done your self-reflection, you'll be able to navigate the interview.
All right.
Anita, I think that's really important too in a sales, is for us to really know what we want. Yeah. I see more sales hires fail because leadership realized later they didn't hire for they didn't really think that through beforehand and hire for the right thing. So unfortunately, the person's going to have to leave. Yeah. But they never were the right hire in the first place.
That's right. Yeah. Or, I mean, sometimes it happens. If you don't do the real deep psychological type questions, you'll bring someone in and they looked good on paper and they put on a good show. But when it came down to the basic activity for what they needed to do, they didn't do it. But if you would have asked certain questions, you would have realized if they actually had the will in the first place, they can talk to you about knowing how to, make calls or do research, but it's very different to actually do it. So your questions have to be able to get to the will of the matter.
And Anita has a list of questions that we're going to send to everyone that has registered for this webinar. And so we're super excited to do you want to talk to that for a minute, Anita?
Also your ebook.
Yeah, so that's it. The questions are in the ebook. So it's an ebook that has kind of what we've been talking about here today. So it's almost like it's like my love letter to sales leaders. Like, look, I got you. This is how you're going to do your interview. So it talks about the questions that you ask. I've got some notes, like I've talked about today, why you're asking it. And then I have a section about what you do after the interview as a sales leader, what you're looking for. And then there's a section on self-reflection, like what you have to ask yourself. So it's kind of got all the components of what we've talked about here of really bringing psychology in, as a leader. And it's not natural for everybody. So I thought it was really important in this time to write this. I mean, that's not one of the biggest things that I do in my role, in my work, is not interviews. I mean, it's something that I've always done as an add-on, but I've noticed how hard it is. And so that's why starting last year, I decided to put this together because this is what people need right now.
But you help people
yes.
with you train sales and work with sales teams and sales coaches to be more reflective of themselves and how to work together better as a team and how to be a better servant to their customers.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And I work with salespeople, work with sales leaders. You know, if you're not working with the sales leaders, it's going to be hard to get to the people. And I teach people how to use psychology. One of my favorite things to do is working with sales leaders and showing them how to bring psychology into their role, which is cool. And it's so fun to watch it work. Because I mean, sales leaders get so excited when something that's such a trivial issue that constantly nags them disappears because of something they did that was more psychological. So I love it.
Yes. this is so
Anita,
good.
we love you. Thank you so much for doing this today. And just briefly looking at the comments here, it looks like they appreciated you as well. Thank you so much. I don't know if those of you who are on the call with us today know that we have been doing this as a series this year with wonderful Krista, and Ascend Business has been putting them together for us. We did one with Lynn Heidi at Up Your Telesales on Inside Sales. We did one with wonderful Krista on co-marketing, that if you're looking to increase sales, co-marketing might be something you really want to look at that you've not had to do in the past. Then, of course, we have wonderful Anita today. Thank you, to talk about this psychology that we all can do and need to do. And then in May, our final one is going to be on cybersecurity. And you may not think from a sales perspective that cybersecurity should be of interest to you, but it definitely should. It's of interest to your customers, so it needs to be of interest to you. So we'll be talking about that in May.
I'm looking forward to that one too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you,
exactly. John
ladies, so
Davis.
much for joining this webinar. And as I mentioned, we'll be sending out a bunch of resources to everyone afterwards. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon. And if you ever need help with anything, you have 3 awesome ladies here that can help
Thank you
you.
so much. Thanks, Kim, Kimberly, Brandon, Andre, Patrick, all of you. Wes,
Yes,
thank
you all for being with
thanks
us.
for engaging. Yeah, and thanks for engaging. It helps me to hear kind of the questions that you have too. So find me on social. Let's connect. Okay.
See you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Krista, will we stay on, do you think, for a minute after everyone's gone?
Yeah, let me stop recording.